Welcome to the Amphibian Press Podcast. This is Sarah Forrest, and with me today is L. Stephanie Tate. She's a fellow podcaster and also an author. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So tell me a bit about Sisters of Sci-Fi and your inspiration for it.
Sisters of Sci-Fi is my passion project. It's basically half book club, half interviews. And the idea is there are so many science fiction female writers who have been writing since the 1400s that in order to cover as many as possible, I decided to format it as a book club. And through that, I also decided for the interview portion to interview either women in STEM whose work is actually influencing science fiction, or to interview women who are working in the science fiction genre in something not necessarily other than writing, because I do have some writers. Obviously, I'm interviewing you and several other amazing writers, but like I had a contact lens painter who paints all the contact lenses for every single major sci-fi movie you've seen in the last 18 years, or like, you know, just like crazy things other than just actors or writers or directors. And the idea came because I finally decided to make time for reading again. And I read Claudia Gray's Bloodline, and then I read Becky Chambers' Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and then Anne Leckie's Ancillary series. And I was like, man, I've been reading way too many dudes. This is bunk. So I decided to make a concerted effort to start reading only female and female identifying science fiction writers. And you know, talked to a lot of my friends, and they were like, well, there really aren't that many women writing science fiction. And I was like, that is patently false. Like that is the biggest lie I've ever heard. And I've been told it throughout my life, not by my parents, because my parents are amazing and super supportive, but yeah, so then I decided, okay, what are you gonna do about it other than just like, you know, evangelize the world? So that's how I made Sisters of Sci-Fi, and I love it. It's my little love project.
I love the variety that you have, like you're talking about the contact lens artists and all these sort of, I mean, not background people, but sort of, for lack of a better term, the people you don't see as like the shiny, fancy parts of science, and that's just so fun to get a glimpse of those little worlds.
Aw, thanks. I thought it was interesting because you always get the interviews with the actors. You always get the interviews with the writers and the directors, and I totally get that. And the first interview I did, the first interview episode that I posted was with an actor that I'm friends with who was on Deep Space Nine. And I get it, but there are so many other crazy, cool women who are working on this, you know, and get kind of lost in the stardom, as it were, you know. And I used to do costume design, and so, you know, I also do costume design for science fiction films, and so I get having your work be invisible, essentially, unless it's bad, and then they're like, oh, those costumes. I mean, I've been lucky enough that I haven't had that, but, you know, I've been that jerk who's watching a movie and I'm like, oh my god, those earrings are so clearly from the 80s, not the 70s, you know.
Or when you're like, oh, I remember I had that same like bra from Target on sale. Like what again was the budget for this?
Yes. The first season of Felicity, which may or may not have been a mistake, but a friend is doing a podcast where she's watching it for the first time as an adult. So I wanted to keep up with her, and there was a sweater that she wore that I had owned, and I was like, oh bish, I know that sweater. Urban Outfitters from the 90s.
Product placement, like a decade later. Well, I guess not really, but
yeah, exactly. So yeah, I wanted something different. I wanted something different, and the whole idea of the podcast is to give a platform for women's voices and experiences. And, you know, people like the contact lens painter, they don't really get to share their experiences on a platform like this, you know? And even when I approached her, she was like, I'm not very good at this. I don't do interviews, but okay, I guess. And she was, of course, amazing. You know?
Yeah,
because you get someone talking about their passion, and yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's my baby.
so what's been your like biggest learning experience with podcasts? Because like I know I've had a bunch because I'm a super introvert and I'm not like once I got to the point where I'm like, yeah, it is a conversation. It was okay. But yeah, there's definitely been some learning curves. So which one has been your biggest one?
Editing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been fortunate enough that I've done so many other podcasts, both my own and then actually working on other podcasts and radio shows. But I hate editing. I'm going to be super honest.
I don't think anyone.
And when my husband and I had our podcast, I made him edit all the time. I was like, you do it. You're the editor. You're really good at this. So with this one, you know, he has offered, I don't know how many times. And I'm like, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to finally edit my own shit. Oh, can I swear?
Oh yeah.
I should have asked.
No. This is definitely a swearing podcast.
Okay, cool. So yeah, editing has been the biggest learning curve for me. And just also being patient with myself, because no matter how frequently I have listened to myself, whether it was when I was co-hosting or doing podcasting or when I was actually acting back in, you know, a billion years ago when Dirt was being formed, I was never patient with myself. And so now that I'm literally having to listen to myself all the time and be the person to edit it, I had to be like, no, you don't get to edit out your entire portion of the conversation.
I hear like the first time you hear yourself,
you know,
like when you leave a voicemail message, I feel like when you're like a teenager or something, you just hear yourself, you're like, that's awful.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you have to like listen to it on repeat.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you know, I'm such an Aries, and you know, I'm part Italian, part Scottish. So like patience is just nowhere in my DNA. It's nowhere in my energy field. And so I just have to be like, you know what? This is what you sound like, and that's okay. There's a reason you sound like this, even if you don't know. Yes, you think it's annoying. Yes, other people will, and some people won't. So fuck it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are my two learning curves: learning to love myself, and it's a really good one. I mean, I'm 38. It was about time I accepted the way that I sounded, and then yeah, editing has been it's been the one.
So you've tackled some pretty interesting topics and also important topics like climate change pretty recently and fear. So have you gotten any backlash from that? I mean, obviously it's like the internet and everyone's a jerk on the internet, but has there been like any real big issues that you faced because of that?
Surprisingly, no. And I'm surprised because my audience is much bigger than I ever expected it to be, because I haven't done any marketing. I know, right? I haven't done any marketing or advertising. It's literally just been word of mouth. So I don't know where everyone's coming from, but I love them. The only backlash I ever got was right in the beginning. Someone emailed me a very long email detailing why they hated my laugh. And that's literally the only backlash that I've gotten. I've not gotten any backlash about any of the topics that we've done. I've had a little bit of mansplaining, but I feel like that's to be expected. You know, there's a lot of insecurity out there for a certain set of people having their own personal experiences. But yeah, nothing, it's been surprisingly very positive, like surprisingly very positive. And I don't know if that's just because my audience is so specific, and because it's not that big, those kinds of people haven't found me yet, if that makes sense, you know, because it's nice and small and I have this amazing group of men and women that are just like, oh, I love this, you know. Yeah, I've actually been really fortunate. And I mean, I'm just going to buckle up because at some point, you know, the world's going to explode. And I have had some pretty nasty trolls in the past when I was co-hosting on other shows, including men who hated the fact that I identify as a geek and found out where we were recording our live radio show and followed me home and parked across the street from my house and were threatening my life.
Oh God.
You know, you get really thick skin. And as I stated, these trolls, it's like, I don't know why you think your opinion matters to me, man. Like, get a hobby.
Anything else other than stalking.
Like, yeah, exactly. Literally anything other than sitting across from my house. So I know that when it does happen, I already have the tools to be able to deal with it. But I am surprised that it hasn't happened yet, you know, because they always seem to find you, right? And it's always like, it's always your turn when they do.
Yeah. It's like, all right, you're next. Thanks.
Exactly. This one.
Well, I'm glad you're safe. That's important.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
So sort of kind of switching gears here a little bit. So you're also a writer, you're not, we have our fingers in all sorts of pies here as creative people. So tell me a little bit about Telling It to the Moon, which sounds like a really cool project.
Oh, thanks. So Telling It to the Moon is a collection of short stories, essentially, but they're all fairy tales, and they're based off of fairy tales from different countries. A couple of them are more science fiction-y. And it actually started with I've been writing fairy tales my whole life and researching them, and I was lucky enough to live abroad, so I was able to actually research these fairy tales in their home country. And not the ones that I wrote, but, fairy tales in general. And so I was able to talk to a lot of experts. I was able to talk to, toothless Scottish women who lived in the Highlands and only spoke Gaelic, and I had to have a translator. It was this like really magical experience. I love fairy tales so much. So the oldest fairy tale in my book is Galatea Rebels. And I wrote it after a breakup where I was in the kind of relationship where someone puts you so far on a pedestal that they create what they think you are. And when you finally break out of that sort of emotionally abusive relationship, I was like, I'm Galatea rebelling, motherfuckers, and just so, yeah. And then just sort of held on to it for several years, and then just started writing more and more of these fairy tales for myself, because I finally decided that I had the right to write my own fairy tales, which was really hard for me to do, because even though as a kid, you don't have all these like societal conditions on you yet. So you write whatever you want to write, So I was writing sci-fi, I was writing like fantasy, I was writing all sorts of stuff. And then as I got older, I only wrote fiction, like straight fiction, because I felt like I didn't deserve to write science fiction or fantasy or fairy tales. So when I finally decided I was worthy enough to write fairy tales, suddenly had this collection that was growing and growing and growing. And so I decided to put it together as a book. And I did have a book deal at one point that fell through. I was actually really quite traumatized with it, because the editors were a bunch of white guys, older white guys, and they wanted my stories to be heteronormative. They wanted my stories to, have more male protagonists. And like, listen, yeah, exactly. I'm queer as the day is long. So it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll just write myself out of everything that I wrote. And, being young and inexperienced, I went along with all their changes. And so when the book deal fell through, I just couldn't even look at them because they didn't feel like mine anymore. And my husband, being the beautiful, supportive person he's like, why don't you just go back? Why don't you just fix them? And and then do it yourself, you know? And I was like, yeah, but self-publishing. And he's like, no, self-publishing now is actually really wonderful. And he's like, we're going to do this and we can do this right. So he did all the illustrations for all 15 stories. And every time he showed one to me, I cried, because it was like these characters that I had lived with for so long were suddenly actually outside myself in a physical form other than words. And yeah, I did a Kickstarter that was successful and published it myself. And it's just, I'm still in awe of it when I look at it, because it's, you know, hardcover with the linen and the foil stamping. And it's just this, like, you know, people talk about their children being their heart outside their bodies. I mean, that's what this book is for me, you know. And I'm actually in the process of working on 4 is actually already done. Ironically, it's not the second one that I'm going to put out, but I'm currently working on 2 and 3. And all 4 of these books are short story collections, but 2 and 3, and the 4th book is more along the lines of Telling It to the Moon, where they're sort of like loosely in the same universe. But 2 and 3 are so self-contained, and they are in the same universe, just from different perspectives. So doing that book gave me the confidence to do my next book and the next one and the next one, you know. So that's Telling It to the Moon.
That's so cool. And I love that that you did crowdfunding, because I know a lot of indie publishers or hybrid publishers, like, it's more of the, like, you just sort of do it by the bootstraps kind of thing, and you just hope that it's successful. Whereas the crowdfunding, it's like you're getting all the funds there, like, literally ahead of time. And a lot of authors sort of shy away from
it. In the pre-orders.
Yeah, exactly. So what made you choose, it was Kickstarter, correct?
Mm-hmm. It was actually my husband, because I had used Indiegogo to fund a feature film of mine. And I was thinking of doing Indiegogo, but my husband, having had success on Kickstarter previously, said there's something fun about Kickstarter, because it makes it more immediate. It makes it almost more like, guys, we only have this much time to raise this much money, so let's do this. And it's exciting and it's fun, and there's a lot of energy behind it. And I mean, he was absolutely right. I mean, it was crazy who showed up. My science teacher from middle school had found out about this randomly from somebody. I hadn't talked to her since I graduated from high school, right? Because she taught me middle school, and then she wound up at the high school I went to as I was leaving. And she's like, I really want to back your book. I'm like, where the hell did you come from? So there was a lot of like cool energy of like random people coming in, and it was so fun. It was a lot of fun. And you know, I'm trying to decide if I want to do that again for books 2 and 3, or if I just want to like wing it. But it was almost like a game. It was almost like a game that we were all in on, you know. It was like, oh, today we got this much, we have this many days left, how are we going to get this, you know. So yeah, that's how we decided on Kickstarter.
I love that, because like builds that sense of community, which like Patreon's kind of like the long game version, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah.
And I don't have the guts to do a Kickstarter for my stuff, but maybe I'll try it with like some new contact.
I think you should. I think you'd have a lot of fun, and I think you'd be amazed how much support you get, because I also had complete strangers who found me who were just like, this is great. I'm like, thanks, Rena person, love you. It's great.
Yeah, your brand new fan base, right?
My fans.
Well, I mean, it's kind of what they are.
I guess so. Yeah.
So you sort of mentioned that some of your stories kind of tread that line between fantasy and science fiction. So for you, what's the relationship between those two genres? Because in a lot of ways they're very similar, and in a lot of ways they're completely different.
Yeah. Well, for me, the way that I have had to define sci-fi for myself for the podcast is if science is a dominant element, either through, and it doesn't have to be like the thing the story is about, but it has to be an important element, even if it's just a device that is used frequently throughout, And so for me, my sort of hybrid stories, for example, there's one in my book. It's called The Princess and the Dark Stars. And it's about a young woman living in Victorian England, and her parents are astronomers. And there's some fantasy elements where it's very much about a mythology, about, the queen of the universe and her consort. And they had a little girl, and they like had to go around and protect the stars. And there were fire demons and all this other stuff. And yet everyone was an astronomer. And they had to use technology to figure things out, as well as, book smarts. And there were elements that took place in space. And so for me, because it combined the science of astronomy with, fire demons and kings and queens and courts and wars and battles, it to me was enough that I could call it both, if that makes sense. Yeah, I think it's just, it's like a fantasy story that just has enough science in it to make the science important,
And I think,
does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Because I think a lot of sci-fi has its, like old school sci-fi, so to speak, has its roots there, like Dune. Because that's like Game of Thrones. So. Super much. Also, that's like the most important book of my life, and has been my whole life. So like, yeah. I'm excited to see what, because they're putting out a new film version of it. So I'm sort of excited to see what that looks like. Cautiously.
Are you? I am horrified. Now with your response. Yeah. I'm horrified that they're making it. And my husband and I actually played a game one night where he pulled up the IMDb of the casting, and he's like, I'm going to say an actor and you tell me who you think they're playing. And I said, no, I'm going to tell you who my nightmare is that they're going to be playing. And I got it right every time.
Oh no. Yeah, see, I have like, I'm one of those people, you never want to take me to the like movie rendition of a book, because I'm like, well, I see why they did that, and I'm just like super easygoing with like it being a different medium. Yeah. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see how horrified you are and how excited I am.
Yeah. My only concern is that everyone always makes Paul the hero, and he's actually the bad guy. He's a cautionary tale. And so, right? Everyone gets that wrong. They're like, oh, Paul Atreides, the white savior. It's like, no. He was, yeah, exactly. The Atreides were literally like as bad as the Harkonnens. But yeah, let's call him the good guy. So I get a little worried.
Well, his colors.
I'm also like hyper protective of the right, so he's a good guy. I'm also hyper protective of the Bene Gesserit, because I, as a little girl, identified so much with Gaius Halimohaim, because I was like, but she's like, I understand what she's doing. She's had visions that he's bad. So
someone listen to her.
Yeah, exactly. For the love of God, we wouldn't have had Leto the Second if we had just listened to Helen. Yeah, sorry, my super nerd is showing, but yeah. I digress. Someone mentions Dune, and I'm like, Dune?
No, it's always fun to like find the little thing that someone's super passionate about that you weren't expecting, because it's like, oh.
Yeah, Dune is mine. I've read almost every single book that has come out, including the Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Andersons, and I love the miniseries, and I love the Children of Dune, and I love David Lynch's Dune, and David Lynch's Dune. If I'm like in a really dark place, if I'm having a bad mental health day, or if I'm a survivor, and so if I've been triggered and I just need to like not spiral out of control, I will put on David Lynch's Dune and calm the fuck down real fast.
That's always good to have that, like, that touchstone media, because it's like, it's just distracting enough, but it's also like, oh, comfort, as opposed to like a new film where it's like, I don't know what this
Yeah,
is.
exactly. I don't know where this is going.
I love
Yeah.
it. So sort of going back to podcast realm here, we're all over the place.
Sorry. It's me. It's me. That's the Italian coming out. I'm like,
I can't write linearly, whatever. I can't write chronologically, so I can't speak chronologically. It's eventually we'll get to everything, right?
same.
So if you could interview like anyone, or I guess any specific topic, because you sort of bounce around too, who would it be? Like, living or dead? Who would it be, and why?
It would actually be, so I discovered, and I know I've mentioned this multiple times on my podcast, and I cannot find a copy of it anywhere, and I don't know why I didn't save it, or at least I thought I saved it, and I apparently didn't. There is a nun in the 1400s who wrote a sci-fi story, and I would desperately love to interview her. I also have this not so secret love affair with medieval female mysticism, and spent several years of my life only specifically researching this. I don't know why I didn't do my PhD on that, but I didn't, and whatever, here we are. But I want to interview her. I want to find out who she was, how she wound up in that particular convent. You know, I always have assumptions of why these female writers wound up in the convents that they wound up in, and it's normally to do with the more famous female mystics, where they were like in a family and they were going to get forced to be married. So they're like, I had a vision from Jesus and he said I was supposed to marry him. So bye. I'm going to go. Let's lived in the medieval period. I would absolutely have done that. I mean, like, I'm married to Jesus. Excuse me. I'm going to go have sex with all these ladies in the convent and write a bunch of stuff. Bye.
Well, it's like Joan of Arc. I feel like a lot of times it's like, well, did she actually get visions, or was that the only way to get people to actually listen to her? Because
see, that's the thing. Yeah, that is the quickest way to legitimize literally anything back then. Jesus told me to do it. Cool. Here's a sword. Awesome.
I mean, even now, I feel like people are probably using it. Maybe they shouldn't, but
oh yeah. And do you honestly think they believe it? No, definitely not. So yeah, I want to interview her, because I've already like, and I've had to stop myself because I've wanted to like write something about her, like as a story, and maybe never publish it, but have it for myself. And it's like, no, you don't get to create somebody's backstory. You just need to let it go. But I have this whole thing of like, you know, she'd wanted to be, you know, a soldier one night, and like she wasn't allowed to be, and then she was gonna be forced in marriage, and she's like, fuck all of you, I'm out. She like fought her way out of the household, and then like wandered into this convent and was like, I'm here and I'm gonna write a science fiction story about a female utopia that is entirely based on scientific things that hadn't even been invented in the 1800s, you know. So yeah, she's the one I would. Oh my God, right? I'm so desperate to find this thing again, because that's what it was. It was about a female utopia where the entire thing was based around technology. And it was technologies that she was describing that like we still don't have some of them. It's pretty crazy, you know?
Just getting visions from something.
Right? Maybe she took the water of life.
Right. Aliens. So yeah, if anyone who's listening to this knows any backstory about this person, or the story itself, or anything, please comment so we can find it.
Yes, please, for the love of God. It is going to be my life's mission to find this again, and then finally do an episode on it. And I already have someone who I have promised that when I find it, she gets to do the episode with me.
So that's actually great.
It's too cool. Yeah. It's too cool. you know, it's like when we found out that medieval robots were real, you know, it's like, okay, I'm in, let's do this.
Golems were kind of a thing, just not in the way we
Yeah,
thought they were.
exactly. Oh my gosh. And when you hear about things like the emperor who had the mechanical tree with the mechanical birds who each had different songs, it's just like, okay, cool. Why don't I have that now? Great.
So other than obviously having that episode air, because you finally have your answers, where would you like to see this like season, so to speak, Sisters of Sci-Fi go?
You know, one thing I've been trying to do in a way is have as many women of color writers being featured as possible. And I remember being told the lie that women of color didn't really write science fiction until much later. And I found a piece that I'm also trying to get a copy of. It was written in, I want to say 1809, and it was written by a woman of color in America. And it was all science fiction. And I was like, this is messed up. And then I found one from the 1700s. And I was like, oh my God, I have been so lied to. And I've made such a concerted effort to try to dispel that lie, you know, that I would love to have as many stories written by women of color as possible. And I want to have more women of color being interviewed. And it's definitely not for lack of trying. You know what it's like. It comes down to scheduling, and it comes down to like who's available and also who's willing. And I mean, nobody I approach owes me anything, you know, so they don't have to say yes, and it's not a problem when they say no. So I want to have more women of color on who are in STEM, and talk about the work that they're doing. And I have several women of color who've already been on, and then I have several women of color lined up. But yeah, that's just something that I want more of from this season is just more and more and more women of color, because they are so prevalent both within science fiction and in STEM, and even like working in science fiction in the film industry or in publishing or editing or, you know, being an agent. It's yeah. And the women that I've been lucky enough to interact with who I haven't been able to get on the show yet are just so awesome. Oh my God. Like I work in the film industry, so I don't get starstruck.
Right.
When it comes to like people in film. But I like once told Sean Connery to go fuck himself, and I'm very proud of that. But I get starstruck with these women in STEM that I have been interviewing, because they are just, oh my God, it's just insane to me, the work that they are doing that has real life implications, you know? So yeah, that's what I want.
I have a former coworker who I might send your way to see if she's interested. She works in a morgue and does forensic anthropology, and she's just super cool. So
oh my God. Yes, give me all of your women.
I thought we were beyond this.
Right. Never.
Some things you just can't get rid of, right?
Yeah.
So have you by any chance read Karen Lord's The Best of All Possible Worlds?
Not yet.
I loved that one, so you should definitely check that out.
Yeah, that is on my list for sure.
Well, it sort of touches on this, like, the idea of eugenics when you're trying to save a culture that is dying out, and especially in this case, a planet that's like a melting pot. So yeah, it's just super, super cool and really well written. So
Eugenics is such an interesting topic in and of itself, especially when you look at how it was used culturally, especially in the Victorian period, and all the different like secret societies that were doing these really awful experiments. When I was a kid, I was very morbid, so I was really fascinated by these people who were obsessed with eugenics, obviously in like a horrified way. And it led me to believe that Jack the Ripper was actually someone who belonged to Eugenics Society and was actually just harvesting organs.
I mean,
And I actually wrote a movie about it.
that's so cool.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know that he wasn't. Yeah, I have that movie already written, and I feel like I should just do it as a short story. But like, yeah, it's that kind of stuff keeps coming up. And then you also see things about, like, in terms of preserving cultures, moving beyond that, and like, how do you isolate yourself in a way that you protect your culture without completely isolating yourself, and then, you know, messing up even your gene pool, because, you know, inbreeding and so forth. Something that deals with not the genetic side of things, but deals with the cultural side of things, is a story that I covered on the podcast that was specifically about that. I don't know why I'm blanking on the name. Lingua Franca. There we go. Talking about, you know, how do you save your culture if you're going to become part of a more globalized system, you know? I don't know if you've read that story yet, but it is.
No, it's on my to be read, partially because I saw it on your.
Oh yay! Oh, that makes me so happy. It's a quick read. It is heartbreaking and beautiful, but it's a really important question of, like, you know, what. Well, it's also about imperialism, you know, because these people are literally being mutilated to adhere to somebody else's standard of what's normal, you know. And it's like, well, if you want to be a part of our trading system or our society and not be looked at as like some, you know, inferior creature, then you have to adhere to our standards. And it's like, oh dear. this is not right.
Especially think with like with globalization and our sense of what community is has really changed.
Yeah.
Some, you know,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, obviously for marginalized communities, it enables us to reach out more and find people like the people I've found on the internet. Sounds really creepy. The friends I've found on the internet have been amazing and have like really helped with my mental health. But on the other side of things, it's like, I don't have a community here. Like, I mean, I have a small one. I have family and whatnot, but not like, you know, my bosom community, so to speak. And I think it's really interesting to see stories that kind of connect with that. Like, what would you do to be included, to feel included and to be a part of it? And it's like, well, is that really a good thing? Or
Yeah, exactly. Well, and, you know, it took me years to find my queer community. And I'm still having to deal with erasure of my queer identity because, you know, I'm essentially heteropassing, because people look at me and they're like, oh, you're married to someone who's male identifying, therefore you're straight. And it's like, oh, okay, no, that's not how that works. I can be genderqueer and I can be like a pansexual while still being married to the person I'm married to. You know, that doesn't erase anything. And it took me a really long time to find my community. So while I was continuously getting my identity erased by other people, I at least found the group that were like, I see you, I honor you, like, you know. And that it's you know, it's the thing that saves me, because there are times where I'm like, well, you know, well, not anymore, but I'd be like, well, maybe I'm not queer because blah blah blah. It's like, yeah, no, that's not how that works.
that like imposter syndrome when it comes to sexuality and gender identity is like, and for me, it happens too with like chronic illness. It's like, am I queer enough? Am I, you know, sick enough? It's just like,
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, you know, part of the reason I just went through major surgery is because I was living with chronic pain, and having that erased even by doctors. Be like, well, it's in your head. It's in your head. Clearly, this is a symptom of your being a woman. Clearly, this is a symptom of exactly. Yeah. I had a doctor refuse to do a surgery on me 2 years ago because he said that I was clearly making it up in my head because women make stuff up. And like, this is in 2017 that this happened. You know, I was being told, you know, well, maybe you're doing this for attention. Maybe it's just normal. Maybe it's your period. I'm like, this is not normal. This is not my period, and then they'd be like, oh, it's cancer. I'm like, it's not cancer. It's something completely different. And, having people trying to use your experiences as a way to erase your reality is also a special kind of hell, where it's like, well, clearly you're doing this for attention because you're a survivor of rape. And it's like, no, this is not a symptom of my trauma. This is a real thing, and
because I want to like get stuck in that headspace.
when you hear that enough, right? Yeah, that's the attention I want. Also, yeah, this is absolutely what I want. Yeah, it's good to have a community who says to you, no, these external forces are not what define you. What defines you is what you know about yourself. And that can be really hard to find. But like you said, the internet's been really great. We can find our communities through the internet. I've been lucky in that I live in LA that is, also queer as the day is long. And so I have a really beautiful community of queer artists that I'm friends with, and we support each other. So yeah, I mean, it's insane that in 2019, we're still battling with these things,
It's like backsliding too, like to a huge
Oh my God. Yeah. It's like watching a mudslide, you're just like, oh, okay. Yep, there it goes.
I was texting I have a little group of female friends who are also archaeologists, and we sort of like now worked at different companies, but we all used to work at the same company. And I was texting them as I was driving home on Friday. I'm like, so this straight pride parade thing that's happening in Boston, who wants to go buy like rainbow unitards and light their straight flag on fire and go protest?
They have a flag they designed us.
Yeah. It's awful. It's really ugly, and not just because of like what it stands for. It's just black and white, and it has the male symbol, but basically dragging the female symbol behind it, which I guess is appropriate. But yeah, it's stupid. It's stupid.
Imagine being so insecure. I digress.
You're wildly into politics here. It's hard not to though. Like when you can't like avoid it. So.
Yeah, I mean, you've heard my podcast.
Yeah, exactly. This is on brand.
Exactly. Well, and science fiction itself is constantly pushing boundaries. I mean, you definitely have, the status quo dudes and some of the status quo women who are like, oh yeah, this is all normal. But for the most part, science fiction has historically been politically progressive. It's always pushing the boundaries. It's always questioning, what is it to be human, or what is it to not be human, or what does it mean if we're on another planet and things are completely different? Like, how does that break down our societal norms? And it's fascinating to read a science fiction from the 1600s and then read one from today, and both could have written by queer women, but the societal norms that they're breaking down through progressive ways are still completely different. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating how in the forefront of politics science fiction is, and always has been, because it is asking the hard questions that some people may be uncomfortable with,
And it's really a place for dreamers in a lot of ways, because it's like the world you want to see. And in some ways fantasy is the same, I think, but in sci-fi it's sort of laying down the groundwork to like, and here's how we get there, especially like speculative fiction and like the more near future sci-fi and less like space opera stuff. Yeah.
It also outlines the future you're afraid of and the world you're afraid of. And it's like, if we continue on the way we're going, this is what's gonna happen, in one of the divergent realities. This has already happened,
Well, especially like in Handmaid's Tale, like so much of the precursor stuff that you see, like the flashbacks, it's like, oh, that's now.
That's now. Yeah, I didn't realize that it was a handbook for certain administrations.
Right.
I guess she didn't either when she wrote it. She was like, this is a cautionary tale. They're like, oh my God, this is such a good idea.
It's supposed to be a warning.
Right. And you just want to be like, yeah, okay, sweetie, maybe read a different book and don't paint on your hair.
Right. Yeah, please.
Please, for the love of God. Read some Becky Chambers, okay?
Yes. Or almost anything else.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've become a super fan of Becky Chambers.
Yeah, she's awesome. So I think that's just about our time here. But obviously, you have so many projects. So where can people find you and find your podcast and, stalk you in a friendly way?
Yeah, please stalk me in a friendly way. So on Twitter, you can find me at Sisters of Sci-Fi. The podcast is on iTunes and Google Play and Spotify. It's also at sistersofsci-fi.com. If you want to see me retweeting people who say things better than me that are all politics, and occasionally see me rage tweet, I'm at Queendom of Mab.
And those things, trust me.
Yeah. You just have to be mentally prepared because, again, Italian, Scottish, and Aries. So you're welcome. And on Instagram, it's at Sisters of Sci-Fi. So yeah, those are my things.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me and digressing on all the things. Definitely thank you. And we'll put links to everything in the show notes so people can find you. But this has been the
Awesome
podcast. And with me today was Stephanie Tate of Sisters of Sci-Fi. Thank you.